Hey guys, this is Lauren for Aniwaya Education Services, and today I am here with I did validation. My tools are not compliant. Now what? So, this is a very common issue that we get questions about. Obviously, there is validation required. Under the new standards, you have to pre-validate your tools. Now, if you're catching a non-compliance in the pre-validation phase, super easy fix, guys. Fix the tool, right? So I guess the biggest area that I will say about this is that if you're buying off the shelf tools, if you're buying purchase tools, you do have a requirement to validate them yourselves. So you want to be ensuring that the tools have been contextualized to your cohort. We'll do a separate video on that one. You need to make sure that they meet your delivery method. So the biggest way that we differentiate our assessment tools is whether or not assessment is going to happen in the workplace or it's going to happen in a simulated sort of a way. And then I guess the other big one is whether or not it's going to happen like in single or small groups, or whether or not it's going to happen in a big group. Because both of those things have a massive impact on how you actually go about designing your tools. It's one of the reasons why it's very hard to buy fully compliant off-the-shelf assessment tools, because you're writing for like 3 or 4 different cohorts, delivery methods, assessment methods, things like that. So pre-validation, very easy. Fix the tool, revalidate, document in your quality register, in your validation register, what you've actually done. The way that I like to do that is I will do a meeting. I might do a meeting with people, or I'll even just do it with myself. I'll jump onto Zoom or something like Teams. We'll make sure that there's a Fireflies in there. So that's my little AI note taker. And I'll document the outcomes. I'll document the findings. I will document any rectification actions that need to be taken. And then the Fireflies just creates the notes from that, and we just put that into the client's quality register. So that's the way that we do it. When you have a non-compliance that is on and against, either it's against an assessment tool that is currently being delivered in your RTO, or it's against a student's assessment, there are a couple of additional steps that need to be taken. So the first step is to kind of classify it into 1 or 2 categories. So one is that the assessor hasn't marked it correctly. So the student gave a response that was not sufficient, and the trainer and assessor marked it as competent anyway. So examples of this are like the question is not sufficient, not correct. Trainer marks it as satisfactory. A form is required. It's not there. Like a form needs to be filled out. It's been filled out incorrectly. So I like to make an assumption that these are human-based errors, that when you're marking so many different papers that occasionally you're going to make a mistake. And so, that's the first step in that, is to go back to the trainer and assessor and go, hey, this is missing. Can you please provide it? Can you please explain what's happened? Then I would generally, if I found one, I would go and check maybe 5 or 6 more assessments to see whether or not it's a pattern. Okay. I would also generally at this point go back to admin, because in my RTOs, we don't let trainers and assessors document the outcomes. That's an administrative procedure. So the trainers mark competent, but then the resulting is actually done by admin. And if it's things like documents missing, I would be doing some additional training with admin, as well as doing some additional training with the trainer and assessor. And you want to make sure that you're documenting that, because under standard 3 and under standard 4, you've got requirements to make sure that your staff know what they need to do and to upskill them accordingly. So that would be the first part, is like identifying the scale of the problem. If you find that the scale of the problem is larger, so, we can think in terms of identifying cheating in a cohort of students, identifying that an assessment tool has got a fundamental component that's missing. So, common example in hospitality is that the recipes that were delivered weren't properly mapped. And so, there's a cookery method missing, there's an ingredient missing, something along those lines. It could be that the tool hasn't been reviewed for 4 or 5 years, and you identify as part of that process that, there's a fairly sufficient gap. Okay. Then you start to move into the territory of reassessment. Okay. And the big thing that you really need to identify in these cases is whether or not these issues are what we would call systematic. And systematic basically means that you've got some pretty substantial errors in terms of, the capacity of the RTO to collect evidence that is sufficient, valid, yada, yada, yada. Okay. This is where it starts to move from the territory of, oops, little problem, rectification, need to fix it, to, okay, we've got some systemic issues. Systemic issues are more likely to bring on higher levels of action from the regulator. Okay. Generally, in the case of most RTOs, we find that it's limited to a unit, qualification, a trainer and assessor, a small group of trainers and assessors. And so therefore, we have to do a risk mitigation measure. Now, obviously, under the standards, you've got to keep everything for 2 years after you deem them, after the student finishes the qualification or course. So it does start to become a little bit more challenging at this part to provide generic advice. If you end up in this situation and you have a compliance person who maybe hasn't had a lot of exposure to regular audits recently, that would be where I would be starting to suggest, okay, we're going to have to roll out, a reassessment plan. You would probably want to get some advice in. The reason for that is that the reassessment process really varies in what it looks like. I've run RTOs through reassessment processes where we've been able to link the missing evidence to other units, right? So we've gone and taken a look at what they're doing. And for example, it might be in the soft skills area where in a particular unit, we haven't documented communication or safety skills very well, but we have documented that through other units. And so, if all of the students are doing the same thing, they all do communication, they all do safety, then they do communication, then they do this particular unit, and we can link that back. That would be something where, you can avoid having to go out to students and actually collect additional evidence. We've run reassessment processes where we know we've got the same cohorts, they're all still there, we've got another couple of months. And so for, 90% of the cohorts, we're just going to collect that additional evidence, and then we're going to update the results in the student management system that the competency was actually achieved a little bit later. We might have 1 or 2 cohorts where before they graduate, we need to do a small gap assessment on them. Okay. Other circumstances, we've actually had to recall students. So we've had to call them back and say, hey, we're really sorry. We've identified a gap in your assessments. We need you to come back and participate in a reassessment process. This is where it starts to move into the territory of having reputational damage, and it moves into other areas of risk, especially if there's complexities with, CRACOS or state funding packages and things like that. So when you start to move into, we've identified an error, it is bordering on or it is systematic, that's when you need to be bringing in experts who can help you identify what the best options are in order to address and ensure that you still have that evidence, but doing it in a way that doesn't necessarily put your business at a huge risk. These processes do need to be dealt with carefully. They need to be dealt with tact and communication across the students, across trainers and assessors, across administrators, everyone within the business, employers. Needs to be dealt with very, very tactfully, needs to be dealt with quite strategically. And so you want to be making sure that there is a very clear plan, that management is aware of it, and that it's communicated out through the entire organization in a very systematic manner. So that's generally the process. I always recommend that you don't just wipe it under the table. I'm very aware that there are RTOs out there that will get a non-compliant audit result, and then they're like, okay, let's just that away and move on to the next unit instead. It's just not the way to handle it, guys. In almost all of my RTOs, when we get to that question of, annual declaration of compliance, has your RTO been compliant all year? Almost always we say no. The reason is that we will find that there was a trainer where we had to go back and get a little bit of additional evidence, or a trainer was delivering a unit. When we did their trainer matrices review, we identified some minor upskilling that needed to happen, or administration was doing some resulting and they accidentally issued something with a wrong date, or we hadn't updated the TAS correctly, or do you know what I mean? Like, there's always little things, or there's pretty much no RTO that is 100% compliant 100% of the time. Difference between a good RTO and a bad RTO, in my mind, is that good RTOs recognize that we are run by humans, and so errors are going to happen. And when we find an issue, we document it, we address it, and we manage it in-house, right? So we're able to regulate ourselves. If you are a good RTO, that does not mean you are perfect. You are not perfect. No RTO is perfect. No human being is perfect. So it's very important to understand you are going to find non-compliances in your assessment tools, in the completed assessments, in what your students are doing. It is becoming more increasingly difficult to identify plagiarism. So, that can become the challenge. But identify that when you find an issue, document it in your system, document the resolution to it, and then that way you can demonstrate to the regulator at audit that you are actually capable of identifying when there's an issue and being able to resolve it, and being transparent about that process. And that does fall into standard 4. So this is the way that you handle a non-compliance invalidation. It is highly recommended that you are pre-validating all your assessment tools. And the reason for that is catching it beforehand. Oh my gosh, is that easier than trying to rectify it after it's been rolled out? So if you're not doing pre-validation, you need to be doing pre-validation, particularly under the new standards. There are certainly plenty of systems out there that can help you do that. We always recommend Prickly to Suite. We do some validation ourselves, not a huge amount. I generally will refer people to Prickly to Suite first. But yeah, guys, that's certainly the way to go about it. I hope you guys have found this helpful. My name is Lauren. If you disagree, by all means, feel free to do so, but duke it out respectfully. If you have any other questions, by all means, pop them in the comments and I will aim to get them out to you. Don't forget, guys, we are going to be starting a new series, the CEO Sweet Spot. So if you are a CEO and you have a question, you can email it into Lauren or Laura at aniwaya.org, and we will see if we can turn that into an episode for you. Hope you guys found this helpful. Have a great day. This is Lauren from Aniwaya Education Services.